Without Mike Sankey's books, we all could have been put back 3 or 4 years. We wouldn't have been where we could be to make this happen. Well, you know what? You miss 4 years, you might be gone altogether. I mean, his ability to do that when he did it was critical to the success of PBSA.
Welcome to Behind the Screens, conversations with background screening pros. I'm Les Rosen, your host, and I'm excited to have you here. On this podcast, we chat with the people who know the background screening world inside and out. Executives, industry experts, legal pros, and more. We dive into their personal stories and insights to give you a real look at what's happening behind the scenes. Whether you work in the screening industry or are just curious, Behind the Screens bring you the real, unfiltered conversations from the people who make it all happen. Stick around for stories you won't hear anywhere else. Ladies and gentlemen, Les Rosen here, welcoming you to another session of Behind the Screens, conversation with background screening pros. And today is a very, very special session where we are honoring and remembering our good friend and colleague, Mr. Mike Sankey. And for those who knew Mike, well, you're going to know a lot more about him. And for those that may not have known him or known him well, I think it's really important that we talk about him because he has such a tremendous influence, both professionally and personally. As you know, we at the PBSA honors Mike's memory with the PBSA Mike Sankey Lifetime Achievement Award. And it's named after Mike, not only because of his contributions to NAPBS, now PBSA, but because of his impact on people and who he was as a person. And I'm honored that we have today's panel with us. Today on our panel is, first I want to introduce Lynn Sankey. Mike liked to introduce Lynn as his first wife. Also, Derek Hinton, a friend of the show who's been with us before, and coming out of retirement, coming out from seclusion, right? For us all to see, John, put your face on the screen, Mr. John Kloos. And for those of you that are watching this on video, you'll notice that Lynn and John are sharing a computer in Phoenix. And so hopefully you'll see and hear both. And for those of you that are listening to the audio, it doesn't matter. So first of all, let's start off by asking everyone, where are you calling in from today? So Lynn and John, where are you guys today?
I'm in Phoenix. That's where I live. It's a nice place, but right now it's sort of hot. No, I'm actually Phoenix. Oh, Scottsdale is across the street. And now for Lynn, who I think might be in the same place.
All right.
Well, I'm Tempe.
All right, Lynn, you're from Tempe. Lynn, make sure you're a little further from the computers. You have to talk nice and loud. And for those of you that never heard the story, John's house, where he's calling from, is famous in the annals of PBSA and PBS history because a early meeting was held there in Phoenix, and there was a party at John's house, and everyone still knows that as the party where the rice never got cooked. John, you probably thought I forgot about that, but I had to mention that. And Derek, where are you calling from today?
I am calling from Northeast Oklahoma, Grand Lake. I'm in CRA Zoom on base. World headquarters is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's usually where I'm at, but today I'm out.
Great. And Derek, welcome back. Derek did me the favor of being a guest on a previous program that is available on the Behind the Screens YouTube list and wherever your favorite podcast is found. And before we jump into the details, to give you an idea of why I think it's so important that we honor Mike and remember Mike, I have 3 people I like to give quick quotes from that I think will set the scene. Jason Morris wrote in that the first thing I'll say about Mike is that I miss him very much. He was the first person I'd seek out at every conference and always got a big hug. Likewise, every time I was in Phoenix, we'd get together. Mike and I shared another bond. He was a lifelong Cleveland Indian sports fan, and we always had that in common. Mike taught me almost everything I know about operating CRA, especially in the very early days of the industry. And Melissa Foyles told me that when I started work with a small startup, one of my earliest blogs in the industry was focused on interviewing Mike. He was so kind, candid, and humble. He was so welcoming to me and shared freely, and I appreciated him taking the time to talk with a newbie from a tiny group. He meant the world to me. And Julie Hackman wrote in that Mike is a very special guy. His contributions to the industry are truly some of the most selfless and noble. Always passionate about serving the greater good for all. He embodies altruism in everything he does while embracing a great sense of humor along the way. And we'll be talking about that sense of humor. Derek has some great stories about that. Mike Wicked sense of humor is something that we'll be talking about. So Lynn, let's start with you. You're the first person in this group that knew Mike going way back when. Tell us about your early days with Mike. Where did you guys meet? Where did you get married? Go ahead, the floor is yours.
Let's see, Michael's sister, Patricia, introduced me to Michael. And I actually got to meet Michael the first time at Mark Sankey's 30th birthday party.
Mike's brother.
Mixed brother, right.
Right. And make sure you
There's a
talk to the
luau.
mic so he can hear
I
you.
got to meet all the family and all the friends, and there was a lot of fun. Oh, I pushed his sister Patricia in the swimming pool. And Michael came over to push me in, and I said, "Don't you dare." And he backed off. And Mark Sankey said, "Bullshit, she's going in." So Mark pushed me in. And then Michael sent me an extra pair of clothes, and it was addressed to the Women's Wrestling Federation, and said, "Next time I go to a party, bring an extra set of clothes." So anyways, that was our first time I met him. And we were married within a year. So I met him April 25th, and we got married April 2nd. So that was pretty quick.
Oh, congratulations. And Mike had some pretty interesting jobs in his early years and some ventures when he started out. You shared some of that with me. What comes to mind in that area? I know you mentioned trash, aluminum machines, horses, flipping houses, real estate investment. He did it all.
Yeah, he did. So when he was a senior in college, he needed to do an internship, and his degree was in recreation. So it was perfect.
A degree in
And
recreation. I
so
love it.
So he found out that you could get a contract with the state to pick up the trash at the state parks. So he got his pickup truck and a few friends, and he went to the lakes, so Apache Lake, Canyon Lake, Roosevelt Lake, and picked up the trash and took it to the dump. And I don't know how long he did that. He called it Acme Swill. But anybody that went on the route with him was invited to the summer picnic party. But you had to go pick up trash with him to get invited to the party. And then he worked for a inventory company. And that's probably the only time he was actually an employee. And then he went to Denver, started RapidInfo. Oh, he was doing real estate, flipping homes prior to that. And then up to Denver for RapidInfo. And then always had a passion for horses. And, the can machine. So that happened while we were married. And he met an investor that wanted him to buy into these can machines that they had like at the grocery store, where you come in, you dump your aluminum cans, and it would weigh it out and dispense money. His name was Bill Brownlee, and he told Michael how his father trained racehorses. They jumped right on that, and for years, probably about 10 years or so, they had racehorses.
I don't think a lot of people knew about Mike's hidden passion for horses. Mike always threatened to take me out to the track. We never got to it. And occasionally he would call me and tell me he won. Not very much, but he won something. Tell us about that, Mike and horse racing.
He ended up with 3 business partners. At one point, they had 20 horses. He loved breeding. He just loved the science of what horse was going to breed what horse with another horse to come up with the Kentucky Derby winner. And of course, we never had that Kentucky Derby winner. But there was always a horse that paid for the other horses. So that was the key, is you have enough horses, one of them's going to win enough times to pay for all the other horses. So that's pretty much what we did. He loved it.
How did Mike get started down the road in the screening world? I know You told me about RapidInfo, and he was one of the early DMV providers and wrote the DMV recorder. Tell us about that a little bit. What do you remember about that?
So he purchased RapidInfo, I believe it was called RapidInfo at that time, by a guy named Ed Bach. And I think I'm correct in this. And this was before my time. So I think he developed RapidInfo for 7-8 years, had hired Joe Lambright to come in as a partner. And it was about that time that I met him that they had decided to sell. Michael had about 10 offices of 10 states and a company called PMS, and they bought RapidInfo from him 2 days before we got married. So Michael's life changed overnight. Literally changed overnight. So anyways, yes, RapidInfo he was able to buy driving records from the states. He would run down and pick up the driving records. And then he ended up with this huge computer room, like this was back in the days when computers took up rooms. They weren't just little laptops, right? And he would get orders from insurance agents, and then he would get the driving records and get them back to the insurance agents faster than if they went straight to the state, to the driving record. Right. So that's what that was about. And then after he sold RapidInfo, he was like, what do I do? And he recognized that a lot of people didn't understand the different laws in each state for driving records, for penalties. And then also when they did get a driving record, how do you read it? That's all in these codes and points, and who trades driving records that, right? So that's when you decided to write the books. On the MVR book was the first one, then the MVR Decoder book. And then from there, the source book and 100 that he did as after.
And then at that point, it became BRB Publications, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And, a little bit of history. Mike started BRB Publications. Mark was involved. A gentleman that a lot of us may not recall, but just one of the shining stars in the data industry, Carl Ernst. Derek knows him well. Just a genius. The guy was so smart that I would just listen to him and pretend I knew what he was talking about. It was always profound. I was embarrassed to say, I don't follow. But Mike was sort of the head person. And for those who don't remember, BRB Publications was the nation's premier publisher of references and websites used for locating public records. And their books and electronic products pointed the way to over 28,000 government agencies and 3,500 public record vendors. And the MVR book and the MVR Decoder were really the Bibles of the industry. Everyone had those. Every year you waited for the new one. So, Derek, you remember all those days? You want to add to that?
I remember them well. Mike was a competitor at RapidInfo when I was at DAC for driving records. And then we had a book called The Guide to Background Investigations, kind of a precursor to the source book. We had to update. We updated it once every 2 years. We'd hire about 10 to 15 temps to go and, we'd mail a letter to every county, and the temps would type it in, call the ones that weren't there. And it was really a pain in the patootie, with all these temps. So I knew that Mike was doing some branching out in the county locator and some other books right then. And so I called him out of the blue one day. And I think Annette answers the phone and, can I ask who's calling? And it's Derek Hinton with the Guide to Background Investigations. And Mike picked up the phone and said, hello, in that low voice of his, like, why are you calling? I know you're the Guide to Background Investigations. You're the only competitor I have. But for a while, we just kind of did a deal where they were doing the research anyway for UCC Guide and some other stuff. So they did all the research, and we paid them for the research. And Carl Ernst, who you talked about, wrote scripts. And so for a while, before we sold the book to him and it turned into the source book, it was 2 different books with the same research information. And that's how I first met Mike. It was kind of scary calling him up, and especially with that hello. But I'd known him better, I wouldn't have been scared.
And I mean, I'll put in a couple of comments here. Fred Giles wrote a note that Mike was a leader and source of information even before any PBS, talking about the BRB books and all the publications. Kurt Schwall told me that without Mike Sankey and his resource materials, the background screening industry's development would have been delayed by several years. For those of us who have been in the industry for 20 plus years, we know that we could not have performed background checks without the help of the source book for public records and other materials published by BRB. And that is a fact. So often the question back then was, how do I get this and who do I need to contact? And those answers always, or so it seemed, can be found through Mike's reference materials. A background screening company simply could not function without these materials back in the early days. And though he may not have been aware of it at the time, that his books would help incubate a new and explosive growth industry, and it did just that. And thanks, Kurt, for sharing those comments. So let's move on then. Derek, what do you recall about BRB most fondly in some of those early days?
With the early days, he was just fun to work with. He was a teaser. After, BRB, we, kind of got to work. I did a criminal record book. We had one for in-house, and it was more of a pamphlet than a book, and sent it to him, and I said, you need to do a book of this. And he wants to read about criminal records. I think he kind of had in mind an MVR book. Well, let's do a criminal book. And so he finally talked me into it, and I sent it to him, and I thought it was going to be a long process because he said, you misled me after he got it. And he said, this is going to work. And I still didn't believe him. But he said, you misled me. This is farther along than I had expected.
So you say he didn't expect much from you? I'm not following.
Can you imagine?
Derek, I've known you so long, so that was a cheap shot. I apologize. Maybe not the last one.
But he was the one who really pushed me into doing that thing. Not if it wasn't for him, I never, who wants to read about criminal records?
What was it like? As I'll share in a moment my experience working with Mike as an editor. What was it like for you?
Not too many disagreements, actually. He had a few, but he would, it went a lot quicker and a lot smoother than I thought it would.
You thought? Well, I'll chime in here. Mike was my editor of the Safe Hiring Manual, and that came out in 2000. The first one was 2004. The last one was 2017. So it may be a lot of date now, but it was the first sort of comprehensive book on background screening. And I remember when I gave Mike my first draft, he edited a couple of pages and he just sent it all back and said, basically, this is not what we're looking for. Try again. Right.
You probably, like you do your emails, just to, spell check. Never heard of it.
Yeah, spell check. Yeah, exactly. But I took it to heart and everything that Mike said. And something that people may not appreciate about Mike is that, and about writing a book, is that writing a book was easy. I mean, I turned down a couple thousand pages of material. That was no problem. That's just 10% of the effort. Mike put in the other 80%. It's all about the editing. And Mike just edited every letter of every word of every sentence of every paragraph of every page of every chapter. And, it didn't change the content. I mean, all the thoughts and the materials were still there, but the way it was organized, the way it was expressed. And so, I just had such a tremendous respect for his editing ability and for his ability, and Lynn knows this better than me, just to sit down and I guess for hours poring over material and writing and editing, right? I mean, it's just such a unique skill. And without him, I don't think there never would have been a Safe Hiring Manual. And so I'm forever grateful for that. And so that was my first experience. And obviously Mike, I'll talk about PBSA in a little bit, but Mike pioneered the county court guide and the DMV guide. And I guess on a personal note, I'll add that when my daughter was a freshman at ASU in Tempe, Mike and Lynn volunteered to look after her if anything happened. And it turned out nothing happened. But it sure made my wife and I feel much more comfortable that Lynn and Mike were within 10 minutes of her if something should have happened. So, Lynn, I still appreciate that. You were never called upon for anything, but just knowing you were there was such a great relief. And, one of the things that my wife and I, let us sleep at night. John, you were there, and I'm going to bring you in. John and Derek, you were there as the presenters when Mike was the inaugural recipient of the PBSA Lifetime Achievement Award. Tell us about that. What do you recall about that? What did you share, or what would you like to share about that? John, go ahead, then Derek.
Okay. By the way, I
Yeah.
do feel like that guy on CNN, talking heads, and nobody talks to him. It's not like I'm a Republican.
And now switching to John Kloos.
Okay. Hey, sir, no, this is fun. This is all fun. Here. Okay, so that award and being invited to, talk about Mike and why he deserved it. Let's just say this: I've given more than my share of PBSA presentations, but that was a privilege. Okay, I mean, it just was. And I took it very seriously because I knew I had, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes to talk. And how do I explain what that guy did at the beginning of this whole thing? So Kurt Schwal, you quoting Kurt's one of the smartest men in this industry, and he's paying me $100 to say that. But
All right.
seriously, what he said was, without Mike Sankey's books, we all could have been put back 3 or 4 years. We wouldn't have been where we could be to make this happen. Well, you know what? You miss 4 years, you might be gone altogether. I mean, his ability to do that when he did it was critical to the success of PBS. And I knew that, and I just was very, very pleased to be there and say all some nice things. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Derek?
Yeah, I mean, it was an honor. And I remember it being, a happy time, in retrospect. I wanted it to be kind of more of the humor and jovial, about Mike as a person. I mean, it was better than the alternative at that time,
And we definitely laid out some you-know-what there, yeah. We weren't necessarily kind. But that just doesn't mean we weren't respecting you. Respect that.
And it was good to be around the kids. Lynn, I hadn't seen your kids since they were bouncing around in the back of an RV in Tulsa on one of your trips. So it was fun to see what an impressive young man and daughter that you had. So that was fun too.
And Lynn, let's bring you back in. You were there with Kristen and Maxim. What do you remember about the ceremony when Mike received the Lifetime Achievement Award?
I was really proud of him. That's all I
Fantastic.
can say. I just was beaming.
Oh, that's really
He
nice.
deserved it.
Hard to picture Mike being nervous.
I know.
All right. I've never seen him nervous, but all right.
Yeah.
All right.
It was a different side for me to see, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't like attention on himself.
Right.
And he would
Well-
never talk about himself. And that's one of his pet peeves is, when somebody goes on and on about themselves, they get in trouble.
Right. All right. Well, let me sort of augment that discussion with Mike and the PBSA. And, without trying to bore anyone with ancient history, Mike was basically, I could say, my mentor or guru or person I went to during the early days of PBSA when we had the steering committee. I was the chair, and Mike was on that. And Mike always had great ideas, was great to bounce things off of. Two things that really come to mind is that when we started APBS, we actually had no money. Like we finally ended up collecting like $14,000. So the whole thing was launched with $14,100. And we were running a membership campaign, and Mike had the idea, and this said, why don't you make it so that if you join within a certain period of time, you are a founding member. And I think that founding member status and getting people was really instrumental in getting a lot of firms to join. That was really, Mike's idea. And Mike also introduced me to IMI, the association company, and arranged for a dinner. I met IMI, and I selected them to be the association organization to help get us off the ground. And of course, I had no actual authority to do that because when you start a new association, it's chicken and egg. There's nothing official yet, and it can't become official until you start. And how do you start if you're not official? And so IMI was kind enough to accept my signature on the contract. I was always wondering if somehow I would be held personally responsible if things didn't work out, but it always worked out. And then we ran the membership campaign and had a membership, then had elections and became official. And Mike was just so instrumental in all that happening. So that was just, just a wonderful time where we just said, hey, it was like an old Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland movie. Let's put on a musical in the barn. Right? And so we just all did it. Right? No, we did no permission and no authorization, but we just did it. And because Mike was, a big part because Mike was on it, everyone trusted him. And yet you need trust and transparency and commitment to a greater goal to get in past this period where you don't really exist in order to create something that does exist. So I always appreciate everything Mike did with that. John, let me bring you back in for a second. You're good out of the camera, so we'll put you back in the camera. You lived in Phoenix. You lived near Mike. What do you recall about him in the early days? And we'll get to the later days later, but the early days of PBSA and BRB and the screening industry.
Sure. So, I came from outside. Right? I did not know anything about background screening other than I had one a couple of years earlier. So one of the first things I recognized about Mike was that he knew a hell of a lot more about it than I did. And he was very, very willing to share it, right? I mean, he didn't dodge anything. And he didn't make anything up. If he didn't know the answer to my question, he'd say, I don't know, which is just such a wonderful thing to do in situations like that. The other thing was that he was very interested in technology, right? And so he was digging with me. So our very first meeting, which happened because somebody said, you live in Phoenix, why don't you go see Mike Sankey? Okay, who's Mike Sankey? So I wind up there, and I think the first meeting lasted 3 hours. It was just all very good. He was an honest guy. He was an intelligent guy. He had a good sense of humor. I mean, what else do you need? And also, he'd stand up for you if you needed it. You guys put me on I guess Larry Henry had to step back because he was going to be doing something else. And you guys threw me on the first board of directors as the vendor representation. Okay, so that's great. Well, I also knew the guys who were on the accreditation program, right? And I was watching that happen. And I was talking to some of them, and they're like, John, this isn't easy. I mean, I'm sitting here backing some standards that I don't think I can do. Right? I'm putting myself out of business here. And more than one person said that. So I could see, ooh, that's a tough one. Well, the very next week, we had a board meeting, and they said, hey, John, here's your assignment. We have 9 different vendor standards that we want to document. Criminal databases, county criminal checks, verifications. We need standards for those. I'm saying, really? You sure? Yes, we need those. I'm sitting there. 9? I mean, that's not a project. That's a life sentence. I mean, I can't do that. Even though we had very good volunteers to help. Very good volunteers.
Yeah, Tim Baxter was involved with that.
God, all those guys. I mean, there was no shortage of those people coming to say, hey, we want to do this right. You see, well, yeah, that's what gets these things in trouble is that, you have your way, the guy next to you is his way, and you got to do both. Auger, this is really tough, right? So I'm sitting there thinking, well, how do I do this? Right? I'm looking at an accreditation standard that's taken a long time, taken a lot longer than people thought. What do I do in this situation? And I thought, why are we calling them standards? Why don't we call them guidelines? Right? And that just kind of hit me. I ran it by the guys who were volunteering, and they said, yeah, what's the big difference? It's a big difference.
It's a big difference, yeah.
Don't worry about it, but trust me, it's a big difference. So what I do, I pick up the phone and call Mike. Mike, I need an opinion, and if you think what I'm coming up with here is a good idea, I need your help. And I told him what I was thinking and why I thought it was the right way to go. So I'll call you back tomorrow. Right. He didn't give me an answer right away. But he said, I'll call you back tomorrow. And he did, and he said, you're right. You'll never get it done if you don't do it this way. And he says, and we can always turn them into a standard. And I said, right. Get a guideline out there. See if people like it. And if they like it, because it's not like accreditation. It's not about CRAs. It's about support. So we did that. And you know what? We did all 9 of them in 9 months.
Oh.
They were all done.
That's great.
And I felt very accomplished, but I'm not sure that happens without Mike. I'm not sure that happens without him in the board meeting saying, hey, this is a good idea. Right. So that's my impression of that man. And we became fast friends very quickly. We played by the rules. We didn't, favor the other, we just were good friends and we helped each other. And it literally was, what I remember as the original and probably still attitude at any PBS.
Right.
Yeah, you walk in the door, hey, you're going to help everybody, right? And that was the same kind of thing. So that's what I did early on.
Oh, that's great. It's interesting you talk about the fact that Mike helped you get your enterprise off the ground. Barry Nixon wrote me that Mike has been very instrumental to the success of the Pre-Employment Directory, which is one of the sponsors of the podcast. Barry went on to say he always has been a great source of information and advice. As a rookie in the industry, Barry referring to himself, many years ago, he helped me learn about the many idiosyncrasies of the industry and has been a guiding force in our development. Given the many synergies in our respective organizations, we have partnered and worked together for many years. He has been particularly helpful in guiding us through sharing his knowledge about printing publications as we started to develop our industry resource and buyer guide. And two quick comments I'll summarize. Bob Bell from ClearStar wrote to me that without Mike, there'd be no ClearStar. Bob recounts that in 1995, ClearStar, which was then known as Compass, was exploring entering the background screening industry as a software provider. Bob said he went to the local public library. And libraries were a thing back then before the internet, and asked the reference librarian, who has now been replaced by Google, if there were any books on background screenings. And in a dark corner of the library, at the top shelf alone, were 2 books published by BRB. And they found Mike's phone number, called Mike. Mike answered the phone, probably the same way Derek recalls. We pitched our idea, and Mike and his partner, Carl Ernst, spent countless hours over the next few months giving us the ins and outs of the market, providing us free information, including several books from BRB at no charge. Mike was our friendly barometer and our industry pastor, which is why he was always referred to as Brother Bob in the ClearStar offices. And on a more personal note, Bob recounts a time that he was recovering from a severe medical issue, and he had not eaten solid food or traveled for 4 months. And during that time, Mike would check in on him via text and to see how he was doing. And Bob says when he regained his strength, Mike called and said, I have tickets to spring training. Come stay at the house and go to games. So I did. I stayed at Casa Sankey for several days, ate solid food for the first time in months. And he says, thank you, Lynn. And by the way, Lynn, I've had some wonderful dinners at your house, and I thank you too. And went to an Angels game with some other industry characters. And the next day, Mike took me to the horse races and then walked me around, explained the ins and outs of the sport, and was very passionate about it. And he said this was Mike, quiet, caring, and a simple man who is one of the most genuine people I have ever had the honor of knowing. This was not the last time I stayed at Mike's house or enjoyed his company. And he mentioned something about Lynn kicking his butt off up the mountain there, right? I don't know if you remember that, right? I remember. But Bob mentioned to me a couple times how you took him on a forced hike, and right, he was impressed with your hiking and his ability to survive, right?
He accused me of trying to kill him, and I promised him I didn't mean to. It was not my intention.
Right. Well, I appreciate all the comments that people contributed. We'll have one more comment before we conclude from Mark Sankey. But before going there, one of the things a lot of you may not know about Mike is, we talked about earlier, is a sense of humor. And for some reason, and Lynn, I'm going to have to ask you about this one, Mike just loved Groucho Marx glasses. So, right. There was something about these silly glasses that he bought them for people, made people wear them. All right. And what was that all about? Right.
I wish we could ask him. But every group picture, he would have his set of Groucho Marx glasses for everybody to wear. I mean, and I was doing photography and I did a wedding and he said, here, make sure, take all these. And I said, I'm not going to ask them to put on Groucho. Lexus. No.
Oh, that's great.
Every one of our kids, like group sports, pictures, mom, parents and all that, all of them Groucho Marx glasses. And then he pulled him out when Max was graduating from Emory University in Georgia. And it was parent night for the senior baseball team. And Max was mortified. He goes, no, he isn't.
Dad, stop already. All right. Oh, that's funny. And we posted on LinkedIn before this program went on air a picture of everyone at I think a 2010 John Kloos dinner at PBS where Mike had everyone except himself for some reason. There you go. All right.
Yeah, give me a second.
Yeah.
So let me explain the thing about the dinner.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So we back-checked had dinners. That's all we did because, NAPBS said, you feed them on Monday night. So, okay, great. So that's what we did.
And I loved your dinners, by the way.
I know. Well, the thing is, they were incredibly popular, and I'm like, all we do is go to dinner. I mean, that's all we do. Now we weren't afraid to go to some offbeat places. So there were some interesting dinners, but mostly it was just we just get together and they're good people. And the other thing I did, which was really nice, is I had my customers there, but then I had what we call celebrity guests. You were a celebrity guest.
Oh, my God.
Derek was a celebrity guest. Mike was a celebrity guest, right?
Okay.
And I was just joking by calling it out. But then, the truth is, one of my clients came up to me and said, how do you know all these people? You know who these people are? Yeah. So anyway, it actually had a cover. But anyway, the thing about Mike and those, he actually asked me, he said, John, I had something I want to do at the end of dinner. I said, what's that? He says, I want to give everybody one of these. And I laughed. I laughed out loud, right? And here's the thing about Mike. He wasn't just a humorous guy. He understood humor. And we would talk about that from time to time. What's funny? What's not funny? When do you do it? How do you deliver it? We would talk about that because it's like anything else. It's part art. It's part science. But the beauty of the Groucho Mask is this. It is, and of itself, humorous. All you got to do is put it on, and people laugh. And if you get a lot of people to put it on, a lot of people. And it's just pure. It's just pure gold. It's just pure gold. So that's why he did it. It was easy, right? It cost money, but it always worked. It just always went. Okay, Lynn, you're back.
That's great.
I think that's a great explanation.
Oh, well, I think I can take this off now. And before we move on from Mike's sense of humor, Derek told me, and Mike told me the same story, and it was just hilarious. Derek, tell us a story about the family album.
He probably laughed more about it than I did, telling you the story. He knew, and this is Mike, he remembered that we went on vacation in New Mexico, and this was in the summer, and didn't say anything more about it. And at the end of the year, right before Christmas, I got a hardbound, express mailed book, full color pictures all the way through, and say it was so nice meeting you. And here's little John. We didn't have him with us, but you kept asking about him, so here he is. And just on and on in this letter. And the Bickleys. It was from the Bickleys from San Diego. I could not remember. I asked, Becky, my wife, and I've never seen those people in my life. I really don't remember. And we thought, we Google Earthed the house in San Diego. We just racked our brains trying to figure this out. It's an expensive piece. It wasn't just a piece of cardboard. It was, an expensive book that had been express mailed. And I could not, we were wondering, did we take a little hike up into Colorado and get something and just have memory loss or what? I just couldn't. And this went on, it was, for a couple of weeks. And it was just, I don't know how many people I accused of it. And then Mike, and I called him up and he went, are you by any chance have any friends named Bickley? And he went, that laugh of his. And he was, I mean, just so impish. I think he did the same thing to his parents, didn't he? And they were up in the attic looking, several
That
years
was
before,
part-
looking for church directives from 30 years ago. So it was just,
They were looking for a church direction 3 years ago to see the people. Lynn, I'm sorry, you were about to say something. You wanted to go?
Oh, well, what he did to his parents was part of a thing that he and a friend named Mark did with 50 people. So Mark Dauphiné had 25 names. Michael had 25 names. And they wrote a fictitious Christmas letter and they mailed them to each other, people. And it went on for 5 years. So it was Frank and Jenny Lewis, and they were bizarre. They were just a made-up family that was just nuts, and no one knew who they were. I mean, people went on and on. Like, I had friends call me and say, I get these letters, these Christmas letters from somebody. I have no idea who it is. And anyway, so yeah, Michael's mom and dad went up and got their old church directories looking for who's, Frank and Jenny Lewis are. It went on for a long time. And then in the summers, we would have to sit down and write personal postcards. And he would say, so-and-so told us you moved. And then I'd take my wine and smear out the name. They wouldn't know who's told them that they moved. Anyways, this is how he spent his time.
Yeah, well, I don't know how he found so much time. He did so much, and he had fun doing that stuff too. One of the things that Mike was so proud of his family, and we mentioned that Max and Kristen were at the award ceremony. What are they up to these days?
Well, they're both married. They both recently, Kristen was married in 23, and Maxim and Kristen and Ian, Max and Jen just got married last year. I'm a grandma. Kristen and Ian had a little girl in December. It's all great. Everybody's doing really well. They found their mates. They're happy. And, I can't be happier for them. That was important to me.
Oh, congratulations. Well, folks, we covered a lot of ground here today. Before we conclude, I do want to read one more comment from Mark Sankey, Mike's brother. And I think this really summarizes a lot. And so I'd like to read exactly what Mark sent me. Mark said that Mike was 8 years older than me. It's natural for a little brother to grow up idolizing his big brother, and my admiration for Mike never diminished. As we grew older, raised families, and worked side by side for 2 decades, that respect only deepened. As a brother, Mike was a role model in ethics, hard work, and commitment. We worked together for 20 years, and all that time, I can't recall a single heated argument between us. We didn't always agree, but he always listened to my perspective. When I had a good idea, he welcomed it. When I was wrong, he didn't criticize it. He taught and coached. That was who he was. As a father, I had a front row seat to his dedication. Living about 100 miles from Mike and Lynn, I spent thousands of nights in their spare bedroom. I saw firsthand how deeply committed he was to his family. And even though he worked long hours, he was always there for the kids. Whether it was a ball game, a school event, or simply family time around the dinner table, his family wasn't just a priority, they were the focal point of his daily life. As a businessman, Mike achieved something very few people manage, balancing demanding work with meaningful family time. He had an unwavering commitment to accuracy, meeting deadlines, and creating the best product possible. Even during the most stressful periods, sometimes releasing as many as 20 books in a year, he always made time to answer the phones and spend time helping a friend or an acquaintance in the industry. On the amusing side, although only 8 years older, Mike was much greater than I was. It was not uncommon for someone at an APBS conference convention to say, "Hey, Mike, I met your son," or "How long have you worked with your dad?" It was always enjoyable to have the opportunity to needle him, and it never got old. And Mark concludes by saying, "I am proud to have been Mike Sankey's brother, and I deeply appreciate the efforts of his friends at PBSA to keep his memory alive." Mark Sankey. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a fantastic session. We're nearing the hour mark. And as is our custom, we always turn the floor over to give our guest the last word. I think we covered anything, but if there's anything you want to add, augment, whatever, We'll start with Lynn and Derek, and then we'll go to John. So, Lynn, any final additions you'd like to add?
I just want to thank you and John and Derek for being here to do this. 7 years is a long time for someone to be gone and to be thought of and honored like this in an industry. It just warms my heart, and I know he was a man of integrity. He was the best. So, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Derek?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about, Mike's, humor. One time I told him, Mike, you're a smart guy, but you hide it really well. And, and that was part of it. For all the nose glasses and stuff, he was a really smart guy. I think of him, I remember him as, high energy, emphasis, humor, intelligence, and that kindness to help anybody in the industry without getting anything for it.
Yep.
And thank you much for doing this.
Yeah. And I'll augment the part about how smart he was when I worked with him on the Safe Hiring Manual and another book. He understood it. He got it. He was able to take the material and make suggestions and massage it and do certain things. And, it was tremendous to work with. And the guy was just no idea how he got that much energy and how he could put his nose in the grindstone and everything else. So just an amazing person. And John, we'll conclude with you, man. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to touch on the football game we went to. And you might say, well, what's the big deal about a football game? And the answer to that is, it isn't a big deal. That's why it's a big deal. It's a big deal because I'm talking about a football game that happened 2019, January 1st, 2008. And it was the Fiesta Bowl game, right? And I had some Fiesta Bowl tickets that I've had for 20 years. They just happened to fall in my lap, and I grabbed them. And they're so great because they're literally on two tickets, literally on the 50-yard line, 25 rows up. You cannot sit in a better place, and it's a bowl game. It's a high-end bowl game. But anyway, a few weeks earlier than that, I got a call from Mike. I'd been wanting to call and see how he's doing, but like a lot of people, you hesitate, right? And then here I am sitting here at this very desk, and I see Mike Sankey. He's calling me, right, to check in and tell me how things are going, right? And I'm sure that he made a lot of those calls. That's what you call a class act, right? Because people don't want to call, so he calls them. We're in this conversation, and near the end of it, I say, so, is there any chance you want to go to the Fiesta Bowl on January 1st? He said, who's playing? I said, LSU and UCF, Central Florida. Yeah, I can do that. And I said, all right, so you can do that, and I believe it, but here's the rule. If right up to the last day before you don't think you want to do that, you just say so. If we're on the way and you say turn around, we'll turn around. If it's the second quarter, you just say, we'll go. Well, we got to do. And I don't know. That's what two guys want to do on New Year's Day. You want to go to a damn football game. We got to do it. 3.5 hours worth of a game. Very close, right up to the end. And so, for all that time, we're not thinking, man. We're watching what's in front. And so the reason I brought it up is I want to thank Lynn for not stopping us. Take it away.
John, well, thanks for sharing. And let me thank our panel. This has just been a wonderful trip down memory lane and a wonderful chance to remember a dear friend and who's contributed to people's lives on so many different levels. And that contribution continues today. So on behalf of Behind the Screens, let me thank Lynn Sankey, John Kloos, Derek Hinton for joining us in this special episode, remembering our good friend, Mike Sankey. Mike, we love you. And stay for our next episode. We'll be back with an episode after this. And the future episodes brought to you by Barry Nixon and the Pre-Employment Directory. And thank you for listening in to this episode. Behind the Screens, remembering Mike Sankey. Thank you. All right, that was yet another wonderful conversation with a background screening pro. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an update. And hey, if you got a moment, we'd love for you to leave us a review. It really helps get the word out. For more info or to catch up on past episodes, or to make suggestions or to suggest possible future guests, head over to our website. Once again, this is your host, Les Rosen, and it's been a pleasure to bring you another episode. See you on the next episode. Thanks.